A container falls into the ocean, and from the outside, it seems like a trifle. One container disappeared against the backdrop of a giant ship, thousands of containers, and endless water. But it is precisely because of such losses that starting January 1, 2026, international regulations have become stricter for the entire merchant fleet. Because one lost container is not just a loss, it is a hidden threat on the route. Source of pollution, insurance dispute worth millions, and a story that could end anywhere, at the bottom, by a foreign shore, or in an international investigation. And the further we delve into this topic, the stranger the picture becomes. The ocean not only takes away the cargo, but sometimes it returns it back to people. And world trade still cannot provide an absolutely accurate figure. How many containers have been lost throughout the history of container ships? A container does not fall into the sea by itself. Before this, there is almost always a whole chain of reasons. An error in specifying the weight, unsuccessful distribution of the cargo, overloaded upper decks, tired fastenings, heavy swell, incorrect course angle, dangerous roll. On a container ship, each ton does not work separately, but presses down on the entire adjacent stack. And each wave strike passes through the hull and fittings immediately to dozens of rows. The most unpleasant mode for such vessels is called parametric rolling. A vessel is not required to capsize or lose speed for danger to begin. On the contrary, externally the ship may appear to be fully controllable, but the amplitude of the rolling suddenly increases to such a level that multi-ton containers begin to experience critical loads. This is why some of the loudest incidents, it looks more like a working flight than a cinematic disaster, where the vessel continues on its way. While on the deck, the fastenings are already tearing and the stacks are shifting. A good fresh example occurred in March 2026, when the container ship OOCL Sunflower lost containers overboard during heavy weather in the northern part of the Pacific Ocean. And part of the other containers on board was damaged and shifted. Various reports mention data, a minimum of 32 and up to 57 lost containers. The most important thing here is that the ship did not disappear and did not turn into a total wreck. But this was still enough for the navigation warnings and Coast Guard services to activate. From this moment on, the container ceases to be part of the cargo and becomes an independent threat. A partially submerged container is hard to notice in the wave. A damaged container may rupture. The cargo may start to drift on the water. For a small vessel, such a steel box becomes almost an invisible obstacle. This is why the amendments to the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, known as SOLAS, require immediate reporting starting January 1, 2026, about lost and sighted drifting containers to nearby vessels, the nearest coastal state, and the flag state, with the indication of coordinates, time, number of containers, and the presence of hazardous cargo. The world has officially recognized a simple fact. After the containers fall, the story does not end, but only begins. The most insidious aspect of this topic is that for many years, the overall statistics looked almost reassuring. The World Shipping Council reported in its 2025 report that 576 containers were lost at sea in 2024. In 2023, there were 221 containers, while the 10-year average is 1,274 containers per year. Against the backdrop of more than 250 million containers transported by sea each year, this share seems microscopic. For a person who only looks at percentages, the problem seems to disappear. But the sea does not count in percentages. For the ocean, coast, navigation, and insurance, the overall percentage is not as important as the consequences of each individual drop. One container with regular goods can already pose a threat on the route. One container with chemicals, batteries, or plastic pellets turns into an environmental problem. One storm episode with hundreds of containers breaks the logic of the entire transport and triggers a chain of notifications. The most well-known example in recent years is one Apis, which lost or damaged more than 1,900 containers in 2020. After such incidents, it became clear that rare mishap is an incorrect definition. It is more accurate to say this: it is a rare event with disproportionately large consequences. And it is precisely here that the viewer usually wants to argue with the numbers. Therefore, write in the comments what you think. Has humanity lost thousands of containers throughout the history of container ships? or is the count already in the tens of thousands? And watch this analysis to the end, because at the finale, there will be the most uncomfortable answer of the entire topic. How many containers the world has definitely lost according to estimates, why there is no complete figure, and how much this costs in money. If you enjoy analyses where one familiar detail suddenly turns an entire industry upside down, the subscription here is also not accidental. The strangest part of the story begins next, where the ocean sometimes returns lost cargo back to people. After hitting the water, the container disappears from sight, but it does not disappear from reality. Then it begins its second life. And it is precisely this that makes the topic so strong for YouTube. Some containers quickly sink, taking on water through damage. Some stay afloat or partially submerged for a while. The semi-submerged container is considered one of the most unpleasant objects at sea because it is difficult to visually detect, especially in rough waters, and it becomes an obstacle for small vessels. Then the ocean connects: wave, wind, current, and time. The container can crack, it can lose its doors, it can tear apart after hitting the shore, and the contents begin to spread across a vast area. At this moment, dry logistics suddenly turns into a very strange plot, where foreign cargo begins to surface in completely different places. One of the most famous examples occurred after the MSC Napoli accident. At that time, containers and goods were washed ashore, and people flocked to the beach for quote-unquote finds, effectively turning the accident site into an impromptu hunt for other people's property. For the authorities, this has become not only a rescue and environmental issue, but also a matter of public order. And this is one of the most powerful facts of the entire topic. The ocean does not just take containers, and sometimes it returns them back, but already in the form of garbage, debris, and new danger. The earlier the location of the loss, the number of containers, and the type of cargo are known, the higher the chance to warn other vessels. That is why the new requirements of the International Maritime Organization do not appear as a formal paper measure, but rather as a late acknowledgement of reality. A container does not end at the point of drop. He continues to move through the world already out of the system's control. Now to the most uncomfortable question of the entire topic, which at first seems simple, but in reality turns out to be shameful for the entire trade. There is still no exact official figure for how many containers have been lost throughout history since 1956. The first successful container voyage, Ideal X, took place in 1956. However, reliable industry estimates from the World Shipping Council have only been conducted since 2008. From 2008 to 2022, the Council estimated average losses at 1,566 containers per year. This amounts to approximately 23,490 containers. If we add the confirmed 221 containers for 2023 and 576 containers for 2024, it results in a minimum of about 24,287 containers just for the documented period of 2008 to 2024. The actual figure throughout history since 1956 is definitely higher, but exactly how much the world does not know due to the lack of a unified accounting system. The situation with money is just as strict. There is also no single global sum of losses, but individual accidents show the scale. After one APIS, insurance losses were estimated at more than $200 million. And this is just one voyage, one ship, one storm episode. Who is responsible for this money? First insurance, then inspection, whether the goods are correctly declared, whether the weight is accurately stated, whether packaging rules are followed, whether the hazardous cargo is described correctly, at what level the carrier's liability lies. Does a general emergency regime arise when extraordinary expenses are distributed among the participants of a maritime enterprise? Previously, such cases were often perceived as disputes between the company and the insurer. Today, they are viewed more broadly. A lost container is damage, risk, environmental threat, and an international security issue. And that's why the response in the end sounds much harsher. The world has definitely lost, not hundreds or just a few individual containers. The confirmed minimum has already exceeded 24,000. The actual total since 1956 is higher, but no one can name it exactly. Maritime trade has finally started to regard a lost container not as a minor loss. And as for the event that needs to be immediately counted, recorded, and transmitted to the entire maritime world, end of communication.